With the 2022 NBA season right around the corner, everybody is starting to buckle down and really get into some deep dive analysis for how the upcoming season should play out. This offseason was filled with big moves and changes, and lots of teams have either improved or maybe they've gone backwards. But for today's video, we'll once again be looking at the issues each team will face. This is actually the second part of this video's topic, and in both my last video and now this one, we are discussing every NBA team's biggest issue going into the 2022 season. In the last video, we went through the teams in the Eastern Conference, so if you missed that one, make sure to go back and watch it after you finish this one. But today, we'll now be going through all of the teams in the Western Conference. Before we start though, it turns out about 51% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, we'll start with the Dallas Mavericks, and their biggest issue going into the new season is that they're still way too reliant on Luka Doncic. This was one glaring issue with the team when they got eliminated from last season's playoffs, and this offseason they, for the most part, opted to run it back, with one key addition being Reggie Bullock, who does well as a 3-and-D role player, but doesn't solve this issue. Kristaps Porzingis is going to have to step up and take more control of the offense, because otherwise, the team really didn't improve all that much. Next up is the Denver Nuggets, and their biggest issue going into the season is their defense. Jokic notoriously struggles on the defensive end, especially when you force him to defend in space in pick-and-roll actions, and the pieces around him aren't that great on that end either. Jamal Murray was starting to improve in that regard, but he'll miss most of the season, and the emergence of Michael Porter Jr. is great on offense, but he's still a big negative on defense at this point in time, and losing a key veteran like Paul Millsap will hurt that end as well. They're going to have to outscore teams a lot, which they can do, but it won't always be easy. Next up is the Golden State Warriors, and their biggest issue for the next year is the state of Klay Thompson. After 2 seasons in a row of missing the playoffs, the return of Klay to the team offers a sign of hope for a return to competitiveness. But simultaneously, we have to remember Klay hasn't played basketball in literally 2 years, so we should temper our expectations. It's very unlikely he returns fully to his prior form because of this, so our expectations for the team as a whole should be just as cautious. Up next, we have the Houston Rockets, and their biggest issue going into the season is that they're far too young right now. I absolutely love the young core of players that the Rockets have put together, and their future is as bright as anybody's right now, but I've heard some rumblings from fans saying this team could sneak into the playoff play-in tournament, and I don't think they're ready for that at this point in time quite yet. Next up is the Los Angeles Clippers, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their playmaking. The Clippers have a lot of talent in the department of shot creation and score-first talent, but when it comes to having a guy who's out there to make the lives of those around him easier by creating for others, they just don't necessarily have that. They tried with Rajon Rondo last season, which saw mixed results, and now they have Eric Bledsoe, who I'm not sure is the greatest fit with this team. So while they're still a very strong team in the West, this is still an area of need. Up next, we have the Los Angeles Lakers, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their floor spacing. Russell Westbrook is a big addition for obvious reasons, but the trio of him, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis really hurt regarding floor spacing. Wayne Ellington is usually reliable from the outside, but players like Carmelo Anthony, Malik Monk, Ken Bazemore, Talon Horton-Tucker, and Kendrick Nunn can all be pretty streaky in that regard, and when you take into consideration how often Anthony Davis likes to play alongside another center, it really limits how many of those shooters can actually be on the floor at once. Up next, we have the Memphis Grizzlies, and their biggest issue going into the new season is the fact that they downgraded at some key spots. The Grizzlies have been far ahead of schedule ever since they added Ja Morant and started rebuilding, as they made the playoffs just last season, but instead of building on that momentum, they seemingly took a step back. Jonas Valanciunas was a huge part of their success last season, and they replaced him with a downgrade of Steven Adams. The next team up is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their defense. Again, this is a team that ranked 3rd worst in the NBA last season defensively, and while they have a few good defensive pieces, like Patrick Beverley and Josh Okogie, I still don't think it's enough to move the needle in that regard. They need their stars to shine bright on offense if they want to take a leap forward as a team, because getting stops will still be a difficult task for them. Next up is the New Orleans Pelicans, and their biggest issue going into the new season is dealing with the Zion Williamson situation. It may not have dominated headlines like the Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving situations have, but there have been plenty of rumblings about Zion Williamson not being very happy in New Orleans. He doesn't trust team executive David Griffin, the team hasn't made many positive strides moving forward around him, and he himself still isn't necessarily in the greatest shape. It's a tough spot for the team to be in, and it will be hovering over them all year. Up next is the Oklahoma City Thunder, and their biggest issue going into the next season is, well, a lot, but it's on purpose. I struggled to point out any one thing for this team because the Thunder are very clearly tanking, so any weaknesses are pretty much deliberate and part of their plan. Next up is the Phoenix Suns, and their biggest issue going into the next season is that there's no new key contributors. The Suns just went to the NBA Finals, and they've re-signed most of their key contributors from last year's team, but while they did sign a few rotational pieces that don't necessarily move the needle, other contenders around them have made big splashes to potentially pass them by. They're still a strong team, obviously, but they may have gotten passed up in the West. Up next is the Portland Trail Blazers, and their biggest issue going into the new season is Damian Lillard's satisfaction with the team. Lillard was pretty vocal about wanting to compete for a championship and wanting big improvements made to the team this summer, and, well, those improvements never really came. If anything, it can be argued that the Blazers may have gotten a bit worse all around, and while there hasn't been any indication that Lillard will request a trade yet, if the team starts off slow, who knows what could happen. Next up is the Sacramento Kings, and their biggest issue going into the new season is still their defense. The Kings were the worst-ranked defensive team in the entire league last season, and they were historically bad on defense when you compare them to all-time teams. And while I was a lot higher on their decision to draft Davion Mitchell than most because of his defensive prowess, he is still a rookie who will be coming off the bench. So while the rest of the team remains similar to what it was a season ago, you should expect a lot of the same struggles. Next up is the San Antonio Spurs, and their biggest issue going into the new season is trying to rebuild with too many win-now pieces. The Spurs are a strange team top to bottom, because it doesn't seem like they'll be in contention for anything significant, but players like Doug McDermott, Derek White, Thaddeus Young, and Bryn Forbes are all veterans who would be incredibly valuable on teams in contention. And finally, the last team up is the Utah Jazz, and their biggest issue going into the new year is their perimeter defense. This weakness got exposed big time in the playoffs against the Los Angeles Clippers, and while Rudy Gobert didn't necessarily play up to his Defensive Player of the Year status in that series, his guards certainly didn't help him much either. Royce O'Neal seems to be the only true plus defender they have out on the perimeter, while the rest of the team struggled to keep their man in front of them. And while in the regular season Gobert's rim protection can mask a lot of those holes, come playoff time, we may see a repeat of their same fate. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think the biggest issues are with these teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.